deployment methods. In this video, we're talking about deployment methods. And the first thing you might wonder is, James, usually you use red markers when you do all of this stuff. How come you're using hot pink today? Well, because I'm feeling sassy, that's why. And there's not a thing you can do to stop me. Except for stopping the video. But don't do that, because we got lots to learn here. First thing we're going to be taking a look at is the DVD boot method. This is normally going to be kind of a manual method, although you can automate it. In fact, the auto110.xml file that I made available for you up on nuggetlab.com that I told you about in our last video, you can use that file itself if you enter in your product key to make that a fully automated solution for yourself. And then you can also use a network version. This will free us up from DVD media, where you have to have one for every machine. Now you can connect multiple machines to a network share instead. Then there's also Windows Deployment Services, or WDS, and SMS, which is Systems Management Server, and it's an excellent way to deploy Windows. Both of these are really very good. WDS is going to be an LTI, or a light touch installation method, whereas SMS can be, if you want it to be, a fully automated method, which would be what we call a ZTI, or zero-touch installation. Hey, did you ever take on a project that turned out to be an awful lot more strenuous than you thought it was going to be? Well, that recently happened with me. You see, I've got a really good friend of mine. He's only 19 years old, and I'm 40 years old. So quite an age difference, and he works out all the time, and he's young and full of energy and all this stuff, and he says to me, James, let's go hike Camelback Mountain, and here's a picture of it. Well, I had hiked Camelback Mountain about a year ago, and although it totally beat me up by the time I got up and down it, I was able to successfully do it. So I said to this kid, well, not wanting to show my age, yeah, sure, let's go on ahead. So we drive down this road, and I think I've got the angle of this right. You drive down this road, and then there's a parking area somewhere in this area, and then you hike up this, and you can kind of see a trail there. You hike up this mountain, and it's pretty strenuous by the time you get all the way to the top. In fact, the elevation gain, if I remember right, is around 1,300 or 1,400 foot elevation gain within a mile and a quarter. For those of you that hike, you know that that's a very steep incline in that distance. In fact, there are sections of this whole trail where they actually have handrails that you really just about pull yourself up more than you hike up, and it's a very, very difficult hike. Well, a year ago I did it okay, but I was with another guy who was about my age. This time, when I went with a 19-year-old, he was running up the whole first part of it and waiting for me most of the time. Whew, I'll tell you, a little embarrassing to know how old I am nowadays. And if I had known in advance how much difference there was going to be between our what kind of shape we were both in, I might have worked out, even if it was just for a week, before I tried going up this mountain. Well, I want to try to make some things easier for you as well, so that you can also plan when it comes to your Windows Vista deployment, because I don't want it to be substantially more difficult or strenuous than you expected it to be. Now, it is going to involve some investment on your part, but hopefully if you know things in advance, then you'll be well prepared, and you won't have any unexpected surprises as you go. Now, I thought about coming up with a bunch of whiteboards to identify everything that you'll need for the first Windows Vista exam 70-622 exam objective, and that is analyze the business environment and select an appropriate deployment method. However, I got so many different things going in all of these criteria that it really is too much text to put on a whiteboard. So what I've done is I've created a PDF document for you here, and I'm going to go over this instead because you can see how many words there are. It's just too much to fit on a whiteboard, and I saved it as a PDF so that you can download this from nuggetlab.com. And this way, you're going to be able to study this on your own as well as you print it out or look at it. Now, we have 4 key deployment methods. There may be other methods to do a deployment for Windows Vista, but most of those will involve things like third-party products or things not related to our exam objectives. So these are the kind of things that we'll address. Also, for the 70-622, these first 2 are the ones you probably need to be most familiar with and in terms of hands-on experience and things. You do need to probably practice some of these things and give them a try. Again, I strongly recommend virtual machines to test all these things out. Now, these last 2, you'll need to know about them. You'll need to know what they're used for, what they're best for, like their ideal usage, and all the things that you see up here on the heading. You'll need to know my bullet points here. However, I don't think it's going to require that you have an in-depth experience in doing these things. You just kind of need to know about these things and be familiar with them. So let's go ahead and take a look, first of all, at the boot from a DVD installation method. Now, the way this is laid out, first of all, we're going to be taking a look at the ideal usage for booting from a DVD. Now, first of all, this is not going to be much different than if you bought your DVD off the shelf at Best Buy or some electronics retailer, and you brought it home and you put it in your home PC and did an installation. You just boot off of it and go through the next finish wizard. So you can still do that in the workplace as well, but normally that's going to be for very small deployments. Possibly as you're getting started with a pilot program or a test program in a larger corporation, but you only want to initially start to do it in a small environment just to make sure that you can run Windows Vistas, for example. Well, that's a possibility. But in terms of the real deployment, when you really want to roll this out to your whole company, only really going to be practical for very small departments for which you're responsible, and maybe you are independently responsible for the deployments within your corporation. Might be a big corporation, but you're responsible for 10 computers or something, or 20 computers. Well, that could be you in this small departments idea, or a small office, home office. That's what SOHO is there. Small office or home office. So for my home-based business, for example, we have a bunch of computers, but usually there's not that much more than a dozen, and sometimes I have laptops that come in and out and some different things. So I'm probably a good candidate if I wanted to just install these kind of using the manual method. Just 10 computers, a dozen computers, not too big of a deal. But I do a lot of consulting for larger corporations as well. Universities, high-end defense contractors, a lot of these companies, insurance companies, a lot of these have over 100,000 desktops. So this would not work out well for those kinds of organizations. The other thing to think about here is you might have to use this boot from DVD method if you have slow or no network connections, because if you do have network connections, you're probably better off to use our network share method, which we'll address shortly here. But if you don't have those network connections, then you might just need to do this on an individual basis. We don't really see that happen too often anymore in current environments, because even for most homes, you've got usually a home network somewhere. I mean, everybody's getting more technical and everything, and most people at least have a Wi-Fi, for example. So we don't see that too often. And you might use this boot from DVD method if you have limited or no IT personnel. So fortunately, the setup process is pretty easy, and even a computer novice is usually able to next finish their way through it. Probably the hardest part of it is entering in that blasted product key, which is convoluted combination of letters and numbers. And I know, for me, I usually fat finger it and make a typo, so I have to do it all over again. So this is the ideal usage for booting from a DVD, but obviously this is going to have disadvantages. The first disadvantage is the advantage and disadvantage. Remember, even a novice can install from a DVD in most cases, but it's also a disadvantage to have a novice installing, because what if something goes wrong? What if it blue screens that person? Well, they're going to be confused. They're not going to know what that is. They might not have any idea how to proceed. Or there might be other technical questions that they have to answer that they may not be aware of. So you do have novices installing it, and that could be an issue. In small offices, this is very often a person who is a manager or a supervisor. They're not necessarily the most technical, but they're the most responsible. So they have to do the installation, and there you go. Also, there's not really any customization. For example, for some of the demos I showed you in our last video, I had to customize a WinPE WIM file of my own, a boot.wim file of my own, when I burned it to an ISO file to boot off of it. And the reason why I had to do that is because I needed to manually add in the VMware network drivers. Well, in this situation, if they do need network connectivity during the process, there's no way they're going to be able to add any kind of network drivers. And if they have any other kinds of drivers they need, maybe video drivers for once the system gets booted and so forth, or human interface devices, anything, well, they can't have any way of adding those drivers for them. They're going to have to manually go out and do that after the fact. Same with updates, by the way. And then installation media is going to be needed for each installation. So I can only go as fast as I have DVDs. If I've only got one DVD for the whole office, I got to go to each machine individually and do it. Whereas if I have, let's say, 3 or 4 DVDs, then I can launch 3 or 4 machines at once, and I can have all of those humming along. As soon as I boot one and get it going and the files start to copy, then I just go right to the next one, do the same thing, and so forth. So I can really increase my productivity that way. But again, that's not going to scale real well to large organizations, because what are you going to do? Copy the same DVD 100,000 times for each one of your PCs? No, not a practical solution. Now, there are some considerations to keep in mind here, and these are just notes that you need to be aware of in this method. First of all, what you could do to help make this go a little bit faster is you could place an answer file at the root of a USB flash drive or a floppy disk. You see, what Windows does during the installation process is it will scan the root of any removable media, such as a floppy disk or a USB flash drive. And if it sees a file there called either unattend.xml or auto-unattend.xml, and one's not better than the other, just you can choose whichever one you want, then it will look at the contents of that file. It caches it within a local location as it starts to copy files to the computer. And then it references this XML file throughout the rest of the install process, and it can do things such as create an account for you. It can clean the disk, create partitions, mark them as active, extend them so that it uses all the available hard drive space, or use a size of your choosing. So all of those things can be done, and this is similar. This is really, in fact, the exact thing that you would do with the Windows Automated Installation Kit, where you can customize your own auto-unattend.xml file, and I showed you that in our last video. So this is probably the best way to go. I have a couple of UFDs, by the way, sitting around my office, so that if I ever have to run to a machine and just do a quick one-off installation, I just boot from the DVD, get things started, and all the questions are answered on my UFD in the auto-unattend.xml file. I come back, from lunch or something, and the installation's finished, and I'm ready to log on. So this is really the best way to go if you have to boot from a DVD. Now, the other thing you could do is to create a custom install.wim. Remember, the install.wim file is really just about all of Windows, whichever version you're running, Business, Home, Ultimate, whatever. And you can customize that file. What you could do is you can mount it using Mount RW. And remember, we looked at this in a previous video where I use a command like this, imagx /Mount RW, and then I specify my WIM file. I have Vista master.wim. This is a sysprept file that I have. Remember, I captured that WIM from an existing machine, and then I'm pointing it to the first image within that file, and then I want to unpack it or mount it to the images mounted WIM folder. Once I've done that, now I've got this images mounted WIM, see right there, and then I look at the Windows directory for the Panther directory. Now notice that there is right now a folder here called unattend. This folder does not exist by default. I had to manually create that, and then I put in my auto-unattend.xml file here. Now I think I mentioned earlier that during the installation process, when it looks for an XML file, whether it's in this location or a UFD or floppy drive, it copies it to the local hard drive during the installation process and caches it. So you might be thinking to yourself, oh, that kind of concerns me, because it could have a sensitive information in it, such as my product key. What if my user is technical enough to know where to locate a copy of that cached file and then find out what my product key is, and then they'll go home and do their own installations using my key or something? Well, what happens is pretty cool with this. You see, I have a machine that I've already installed. I actually installed it using the WDS method, which we'll address later. But once it's installed, if it used an unattend file of any kind or an auto-unattend file, then here it will still appear in the hard drive. See, this is a fully installed machine, and it's on my drive C under Windows Panther. Oops, there's the unattend file. Well, what I might want to do here is figure out a way to make sure that, if I can just get my mouse pointer working right, there we go. I want to make sure that it doesn't retain sensitive information. So if I right-click on it and choose Edit, look where it has things like my product key, sensitive data deleted. It did that automatically to prevent prying eyes from being able to gain advantage or to be able to see that confidential information, so I don't have to be concerned about that. So pretty handy thing there. And in our case, for what I showed you a little bit earlier, remember back here where we had this, we put it in our mounted folder where we went to Windows Panther unattend, and I entered in a file like that. Then once I'm done with that, I would just go back to doing the same thing I showed you in a previous video. You simply unmount, and then you would also have in here, I don't have it in here right now because I don't really need to make any changes, but you would also have /commit, because remember, if you don't have that in there, it discards all your changes. In my case, that's okay because I've already got everything I need, so I'm just going to unmount without making any changes. And then once you've done that, then you're ready to proceed, and you can do whatever you need to, whether it's making an ISO or some other method to be able to reference that install.wim file. Now, we also have a network share method. Now for this method, one thing you need to make sure of in your ideal usage is that you have a network bandwidth that is capable of handling 2 gigabyte files, because this is going to be pretty large. Remember, the DVD image, the install.wim file, is around 2 gigs, and that's not considering if you've done something like a sysprep that has additional applications or other data files you've put in there. It could be larger than 2 gigabytes. So just make sure you have sufficient network bandwidth when you do this kind of an installation. One thing to keep in mind also is that unless you have some other third-party product or some other method for controlling the network utilization, there's no way to throttle this. In other words, all the installations will use all of the available bandwidth that they possibly can, which could affect productivity. So at the very least, you probably also want to do this during downtimes or periods of least network utilization. Also, the network share method is going to usually be pretty good for multiple installations, but you're still not at a large corporate level because it's going to typically be best at less than 50 PCs. And sorry, my mouse is not selecting things I want here, but usually going to be at less than 50 PCs, and that's Microsoft's party line. Most of these answers right here are from Microsoft and things that I've culled together from various documents and things, and that's what they say. So if you want to know what the right answer is for an exam, then you need to know Microsoft's answer. So they say 50. Also, this would be an ideal situation if you did not have any Active Directory. Because if you have Active Directory, guess what? You're going to really probably want to use this third method instead. Or if you had SMS. SMS, or Systems Management Server, is a really good method to do this, and that's because we can use zero-touch installations. But it requires a lot of other things, which I'll address down here. So if I don't have Active Directory, and I don't have SMS or SCCM, and I'm only going to reference that once here, I think, but SCCM is simply the successor to SMS. That's the current iteration now of SMS, and System Center Configuration Manager is what that product is, and it's just the next evolution of SMS. Now, for the disadvantages, it is still not completely automated. You can get some level of automation with it, but it's not going to be completely automated, and this is going to require a technician at the target computer, because that technician will have to boot to WinPE, and then they'll have to run whatever commands. And of course, this is the method that I used earlier in our last video when I booted from a customized CD that we had created, a WinPE of our choosing, that included network drivers that we needed. And then we also pointed to a sysprep image file. I think it was called Vista master.wim file. And when we did that, we had to use image X. And someone has to type all that in. Someone has to type in image X /apply and then point to whichever file in that image that we're trying to use, or whichever image in that file we're trying to use, and then which drive we're trying to apply it to, and so forth. So this does not use novices. You cannot be a novice and do that. You have to have some technical knowledge and to be able to run those commands. And so again, since this is ideal for less than 50 PCs, then of course it's not going to scale well if you have more than 50 PCs. Again, that's the Microsoft answer. Now, there's a lot of flexibility in doing all of this, by the way. I mean, once you create a network share and you connect to a network resource where maybe you've copied the entire Windows Vista to a hard drive, you can either use the install.wim that's included there if you want to, or you can use a sysprep wim. It just depends on what your requirements are. If you're okay with the install.wim that's included with the default Windows Vista DVD, then use that wim. If you have a customization that you want in a sysprep wim image, you can use that wim. Either way, it's a wim-wim situation. I laid awake at night trying to think of a joke to tell you, and there it was. And you're thinking, geez, James, you should have just gone to sleep. All right, well, then let's just move on if you're going to be that way about it. Okay, let's take a look at what we can do with this. Because remember, you can't just use the conventional setup automation if you want to. You see here I have an example, and I'm going to zoom in here so you can see this a little bit better. Here we've mapped a network drive, probably to, let's just say, drive Z. And if we've copied the entire Windows Vista DVD to the hard drive, then there's going to be a setup file there. You can just run setup.exe from a command line followed with a / unattend : and then the name of an unattend.xml file that you've created using the Windows Automated Installation Kit. And once you press enter after typing all that in, it should just launch and do the whole thing itself if you want to do a fully automated installation, and provided you've entered in all the information that needs to be there. And then we can also use a sysprep WIM with automation here as well. So we have a conventional setup, just like we saw here, with automation, or a sysprep WIM with automation. And we do the same thing that we looked at earlier up in here. We just add an unattend.xml or an auto-unattend.xml to the Windows Panther unattend directory that I referenced earlier. Now I've also put in a URL here for you, and this is clickable within the PDF. So if you click it, then it'll take you to a Microsoft TechNet website that identifies more about these unattend files and some other foundational information. And by the way, for a lot of those Microsoft TechNet articles, some of the URLs have got to be well over 100 characters, and they don't really fit very well in documents like this. So I go to www.tinyurl.com, and you can paste in the URL, and then it will abbreviate it. And this is how it abbreviated the URL I'm about to show you. So I click on this, and I'm going to go ahead and allow it to open that up, and it takes me to this URL, and you can see that's quite involved there, and I didn't want to put that in my PDF document. But this gives you some other methods for running Windows setup, and it specifies if you want to do an unattended setup. It gives you much more information here as well. It's beyond our scope, but it gives you additional information, and I just thought that might be useful for you to know, so I'm pointing you to that URL. Now let's also address one of these other methods, and this is the Windows Deployment Services, or WDS. And how do you get that? Well, you can download this from Microsoft, and you can just search for Windows Deployment Services, or you can also have it already included with Windows Server 2003 if you've upgraded to R2, which is release 2 of Windows Server 2003. WDS is kind of the successor to Remote Installation Services, which you may have used in the past, which first made its debut in Windows 2000 and is still also available if you want to use it with Windows Server 2003. And before I go ahead and show it to you, let me first of all make a connection here to DC Nugget 1 and show you Windows Deployment Services because we haven't seen this yet, and I just kind of want to give you a visual reference for it. Now once again, you're not going to have to know every detail of WDS, but you do need to know the basics of what it's for and how to use it. The very first time you install WDS, you're going to be doing that from the control panel, and you're going to be going to Add Remove Programs and Windows Components, where you'll see it as one of the Windows components that you can select from. And then as we scroll on down here, somewhere down here, there it is, WDS, Windows Deployment Services, and then you would just next finish your way through it. Of course, I've already installed it, so let me just go ahead now and just show it to you, and here it is. What we do with this is when we first launch this, there will be an option to start a wizard, and there may not be a server here quite yet. So if there's not, you'll have to right-click and choose Add Server, or it'll also tell you, it'll give you a little yellow exclamation point over here saying that you need to set up the WDS server, which also starts the wizard. Anyway, we get the server that we want included in this, and this is the one where I want to include all the images. And then I'll choose to choose my install images. This is the foundation of WDS, is these actual images that will appear. What happens with this then is that you install image groups, and these groups like this one that I've already done, the corp deploy, I named that one, and I pointed it to an install.wim, and the install.wim, remember, has all of your installations already in it, so it enumerates all of the packages, the install packages that are in that single WIM. And because it uses single instance storing, it does not duplicate the file space for all of these. In other words, it's not like I've got 6 times, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's not like I've got 6 times 7 or 42 or 44 gigabytes or so worth of storage space. Really, it's probably not going to be much different than the largest of all of these images, so it's not going to be too much over 7.7 gigabytes worth of total storage space. And then if I had an additional image that I wanted to add into this, maybe something I've customized or something like that, all I have to do is to right-click and choose Add Install Image. And then it might have an auto-unattend.xml file that has specific instructions in it or something like that. And then, of course, you need to also have boot images, and here I just referenced the default boot image, the default boot.wim file that comes from the CD. Once again, however, I could have, if I wanted to, a custom WIM file of some kind here that I could boot from. For example, right now I could right-click here, choose Add Boot Image, and locate some other boot.wim file that I've modified or customized of some kind. And here I could just go to Browse for it, and I think I have one on drive C that I can use under WinPE, x86, and you've seen this before, I think in the previous video that we worked with. And then there's a winpe.wim file that's there. That's the default version of that file that we have when we extract our files. But remember from our last video that if I wanted to go to a customized one, it'd be under the ISO sources, and then this boot.wim file that I custom created there, which has are our VMware network drivers. So then I hit next, and if I want to make this more intuitive, I'll also give it a name that identifies what's unique about it. And just so happens that the image name and description both pretty well say it, so I just use the same text in both locations. And then I next and finish, and then we'll see that it will provide that for me. And then we see that the image was successfully added to the server. So now what's going to happen then is I can boot from this WinPE with VMware network drivers. Now, just having this by itself is not really enough, because what I need to happen is a client, and normally we can do this with like a bare metal install, for example. We want to boot our clients to the network using a PXE compatible network card. That's a PXE compatible network card, and that little tidbit of information has been on many Microsoft exams since Windows Server 2000. And I'm not saying it's on this exam, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. So that would be a real easy question for you to get. You do need to have a PXE compatible network card to be able to boot to the network. And just about anything made in the past several years will be PXE compatible. That's just seems to be the default nowadays. The other thing you'll have to have here is DHCP. Now, I've already got a scope configured for DHCP. Another thing that in the past has appeared on exams that you might want to be aware of as well is that when you have a DHCP server, that it does have to be an authorized DHCP server. Active Directory environments require an authorized DHCP server, so I would have to right-click on it, and instead of saying unauthorized here, it would say authorized. Since it's already been authorized, the only thing I can do is the converse. That's why it says unauthorized. But it's already been authorized, so there we go. I've got a scope already set to go, and everything should be fine. Another thing you might need to know, and this is probably going to be more likely on the 70-624 exam, and again, I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying I would not be surprised to see it, is under Scope Options, you'll see this 060 PXE Client. And if I go to the server options here, this is where that's actually configured for WDS servers. And if I double click on this, we can see that it's just got for the string value here for option 60 PXE client. And there's also some other options there that appear as well relating to WDS servers. And let me just go ahead and show you where that other option is. If you go back to your WDS server, right-click on the server to view its properties. Then on the DHCP tab, we see these two options. Do not listen on port 67 and configure DHCP option 62 PXE client. Now, again, we're way beyond scope here, but just to briefly identify what these are, if you have both the DHCP server and WDS running on the same box, you need to choose this second option so that you can identify it, that it's able to serve as PXE clients. Also, because DHCP normal requests occur on port 67, then it would not be able to listen for PXE boots if you had it listening on port 67, so to avoid a conflict is all that is. You check that box. That's normally going to be set up for you by default in the wizard when you first set up WDS. And then the other thing you would have to have, and it's kind of almost just implied that you would have to have this, is an Active Directory infrastructure and DNS. So what do you have to have for WDS to work? Well, you have to configure it as well. It doesn't just happen automatically, but you have to have in place DNS services, DHCP services, and Active Directory services. And then those are the components you need to fully complement WDS and make it work. And now, once all that's been done, let me go to a machine. This is my Windows Vista machine, the machine I want to be Windows Vista, that is. And I'll just go ahead and boot this up where I've already configured the BIOS to boot from the network card. So as I power this machine on, then what we'll see happen is that it's going to get an IP address from the network, and we see that happening right now. And then it says press F12 for network service boot. So I'll press that. Oops, and it was too late. You only get a few seconds to be able to press that, so I'm going to just Control-Delete and start that over again. But there we go. Press F12. There we go. Now, like I said, you don't get very much time to make a selection there. Also, let me just go ahead and see if I can expand this window out a little bit more so you can see a little bit more clearly, and we'll keep going here. Okay, now the other thing we see here is choose an operating system to start. WinPE with VMware Net drivers. Hey, that was the boot file that I already added in here. Remember that I just did just a moment ago? And then this one, the second one there that we receive, is the default, Well, I don't want that one because it doesn't have my VMware network drivers. So I just press enter here, and we're not going to go all the way through this, but you can see how this works, how WDS works. It allows a Pixie boot. It allows you to select whichever image you want to, and we can see that it's loading files from this IP address right now, which is my DC Nugget 1 server, and that's pretty much it. I would then go on through, and if I had any, automated answer files or something like that that would assist this process or help me to take hands off, that would of course be cached on the machine, and it would use the answer file to perform the rest of the installation. Otherwise, I'll just do it manually, and that's also another option if you want. By the way, that's kind of a nice halfway point. If you don't want the full configuration and the customization and all of that for WDS images, but at the same time, you don't want this top option where you boot from a DVD on every individual machine. As long as you have a network, then you can go ahead and use WDS just with a basic installation or a basic options, and then still do a manual installation from WDS. But it gets its best power when you also use it with a light touch installation. Because what happens there is, once you've selected the WinPE environment that you want, like I've already done here, running in the background there, then it also gives the option to which image you want to install, and you can associate answer files with those images. Let me just quickly do that just to show you how that could be done. I could right-click on Vista Business, for example, and go to Properties, and then down here it says Allow Image to Install in Unattended Mode, and then I would just simply select a file and I would browse for an unattended.xml file. And so that's what helps me to get there when it comes to automating that process. So really it's only partially manual. I have to boot, I have to hit the F12 key on most computers to boot to the network, and then I select my WinPE image, then I select which one of those images, whether it's, again, which one of these I want. And then after that's been done, if I have an answer file for it, it should do pretty much the rest of it all on its own. And then I can just move on to the next machine, start the installation from there. So WDS is really good for an LTI, and it's also good for larger environments with an IT staff, because someone has to have the technical expertise to understand DHCP, to understand DNS to some degree, to be able to set all the WDS requirements up. And then I also need high-speed persistent connections. Because I'm going to obviously be copying down images to potentially many machines at once when I do this. Also, LTI does require a technician to boot. You do have to have someone seated at the client target machine in order to be able to make the appropriate selections. And it's not scalable to the largest of corporate networks. It's pretty good for departments, for dozens or maybe a couple hundred machines, and that's my opinion. That's not a Microsoft statement, but that's generally where we'll see this kind of a deployment. And then what we have is the considerations to keep in mind is that WDS server member must be a member of Active Directory. I cannot have a WDS server that's not a member of Active Directory, so it has to be a domain member, and sometimes it's also even a domain controller that also runs DNS and DHCP services. That's probably especially going to be the case as you test this and put it in a lab, because you can lump all of that together on one machine if you want. Now, according to Microsoft documentation, RIS, Remote Installation Services, has to be installed first. Well, on the DC Nugget 1 server that I've been working with, I've never installed RIS on it. And yet WDS is working. But if you want the official Microsoft answer, and this could have something to do with the exam, then you need to understand that their official answer says RIS has to be installed first. That's the old method for doing what I'm doing here. The old method that we used to use for 2000 and previous versions of 2003. Now, they say you have to have RIS and WDS installed on top. Again, that's not what I did, and it worked. So now then we also have SMS. This is pretty much the best method, provided you have the finance infrastructure and expertise to be able to run it. Now just briefly, I bounced over here back to this Vista client that's booting up, and that's the one that booted to WDS using a Pixie boot. And then it drops me off here at the command prompt, which is the same thing we saw in our last video. Here I would just point it to the appropriate WIM file that I want to install and allow it to continue on through. Now if I had just used the default boot environment, the other boot option that we saw in the boot menu, then it would have given me the option to select from, and go back to that screen here, option to select from one of these. And in fact, what I'll do is I'm going to reboot that one in the background and allow it to use the default boot image, which is this one right here, and then we'll see that it gives you the choice. So I'll just boot that, like I said, in the background. In the meantime, I'm going to continue on with our other options here for installation. So anyway, I started talking about SMS earlier. Let's come back to that while the other machine is rebooting in the background. Again, for SMS, this is a really ideal situation for large corporations that require zero-touch installations, or ZTI. This is going to require an IT staff with knowledge of SMS. Now, I'm not trying to sell you video, but I will have to say CBT Nuggets does have excellent video on SMS and are very easy to understand and really powerful tools. So you can use whatever else you want to learn SMS if you want. I'm sure there's lots of books and things out there, but we do have good training on that. Also, you do need an IT staff competent with SMS. Now, it's getting better than it used to be, but it used to be pretty hard to find people that were pretty competent with SMS. In fact, sometimes I work at a government lab in Los Alamos, New Mexico. You'll just have to put two and two together and figure out which one that is. They have like a world-renowned SMS expert, and they even send him out to like third world countries as a favor to these other countries so that he can help them set up their infrastructure for their IT infrastructure for their country using SMS. So he's that good. Well, fortunately, not everybody has to be that good for this product and for using it for deployment, but it's getting easier and easier to understand, and there's a lot more people with expertise in that. Also, it does require additional expense. You're going to have SMS servers. It may require additional hardware. You have to pay for the licensing for SMS. So it is additional overhead, but let me tell you, the cost benefits are far worth it. It's not used just for deploying Windows Vista. That's just one of the tiny things that it does. It has full management of a lot of different things you can do throughout your entire organization, and it will save you a great deal of headache and pain later on down the road, significantly reducing the time that you have to spend with your hands on the computer fixing stuff and analyzing and inventorying things. SMS Advanced Client has to be on the client in order to be able to boot, and rather in order to be able to install Windows Vista. This means that there has to be an existing OS on those machines where you're going to take advantage of SMS. So there'll already be XP machines, for example, and then you'll be able to, because you've got XP on there, you can have the Advanced Client on there as well, and then you can use SMS to complete the installation. So as a result of this, the fact that you already have XP or 2000 already on there, it's going to be used many times for upgrades. But you can use scripting, and this is well beyond our scope, but you can use certain tricks within SMS to be able to do clean installs and things like that. But kind of out of the box, so to speak, it would be most defined for upgrades. You also, again, need an SMS infrastructure to make that work, and a lot of times we'll use this alongside WDS. You might want to use WDS for your clean installs, and then SMS for your upgrades if you want. SMS is just a feature-rich product. It's just a fantastic product that Microsoft comes out with. Again, SCCM is the successor to SMS as well, so just be aware of the different initials there, the different acronyms. And SMS or SCCM can do a bunch of other things besides deployment, like I mentioned earlier. You can do hardware inventory. You can throttle network usage. So if you're doing your deployment for Windows Vista, you can tell it not to chew up all the available network bandwidth and affect productivity of other clients on that network segment, for example. So you can throttle it down a little bit. You can use it for application deployment. Very, very good for that. Deployment monitoring, reporting, a whole bunch of other stuff that I can't even get into right here. But excellent, excellent product that Microsoft has come out with. Alright, now I told you I would come back to this WDS boot. This is my target machine that I'm booting, remember. And this time I use just the default boot image where I choose the locale on the keyboard or input method. And then I hit next. And then I have to enter in the credentials of someone that has authority to access the images that I want to install. So let me quickly enter that in here. Nugget Lab, trainer account. And then once I've done that, here's now where it's going to show me the different ones that I can do. I can say, well, this is the Vista Business, or the Ultimate, or something like that, whichever one I want. And then I simply hit Next. And then, unless I've got an automated installation file that automates all of this for me, then I'll have to possibly do some of this stuff manually. But otherwise, and I'm going to stop right here, otherwise, this is pretty much all there is to it when it comes to booting from and using WDS and selecting your various boot types or your various images. All right, well, that takes us to the end of this section. Thank you for watching this video. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we learned. And then before I forget, let me point out one other thing. Remember, the exam objective for this particular section that we're looking at reads, Analyze the business environment. and select an appropriate deployment method. This is really just common sense. Once you look at this table and you understand the table and everything that's on here and have listened to this video, that will be very easy for you, because you'll just, if you see any exam questions that say something like, you have Active Directory, DNS, and DHCP, and you want to make Windows deployment go as easily as possible, but you do not have SMS. Well, what are you going to do? Well, just use the table here. It's very easy. You can use WDS if you don't have SMS. Okay, if it says that you have SMS, then obviously the best place to go is right down here and use SMS for your deployment method. Now, if it says you have a network connection but you do not have WDS or DNS or DHCP or some of these other things, or like Active Directory that you might otherwise need to have for WDS, then you're going to be using a network share. Or if it says you need to manually perform installations for a limited number of systems, you don't have network connections, and of course you're going to use the boot from a DVD method. So just use this table that I've created for you in some common sense, and I think you'll do really well with that first exam objective. And here are the things that we did learn in this video. We talked about deployment methods and why your instructor is using strange pen colors. But anyway, we also talked about the DVD boot method. Remember, this is the method that you're going to use for a manual installation, or if you have other limitations such as no network connectivity. You can make it automated if you want by using an auto110.xml file and putting that on a USB flash drive or a floppy disk, so don't forget about that. And in fact, that file that I gave you in our last video that's available on nuggetlab.com is capable of doing that if you just fill in the blanks like your product key. Then we also have a network deployment that you can use. This one's going to be very useful if you don't have Active Directory or some of the other services that you might need, but you do have a reliable network connection. We also had WDS. This is what we're going to use if we do have those other services, such as DNS, DHCP, Active Directory, and WDS installed. A really good way to go, but if you go with this method. And then kind of the eye on the prize is if you can go with SMS, if you have the expertise or someone in your environment that does, and you have the infrastructure for SMS, probably the best way to go for a zero-touch installation.